COVID. Let's go COVID. Ooh.
So, just to kind of transition from what we've been talking about, how is it going to affect elections? And this map that we're looking at is just of mail ballots for the Republican Senate primary. So this is only Republicans, which is why you see certain parts of the state as fairly light compared to others. But we're seeing spots around the state where 12 times more mail ballots are being sent in than in 2018. Wow. We're seeing a huge uptick. And frankly, we saw this in Georgia as well. A lot of people, so in Georgia, they got mailed absentee ballot request forms, everyone in the state. So then they had to fill it out, and then they would get a ballot, and then they can mail it in. So there's a multi-step process. Some states are just mailing ballots to everybody. But I don't think Virginia is considering that. So, but removing some of the barriers to voting by mail, there's a huge surge of mail ballot requests in Georgia. But what was interesting is that the state also vastly overestimated vote by mail participation and therefore underestimated how many people they were going to need at the polls on election day. Digging through some of the data that we've seen, it's not that people are transitioning from voting on election day to voting by mail, though there is some of that, especially among older voters. Right. Not really wanting to go to the polling place with all these other people if they're in kind of those high risk categories. What we're seeing is that people who are typically general election voters but don't vote in primaries are now voting in primaries because it's easier. We're seeing some people who've never voted now voting in primaries because it's easier, but the biggest chunk is really from those voters who are used to voting in some way, shape, or form and are just now voting on primaries because it's a little bit easier.
Yeah, and one of the problems we have that in Virginia, especially with the Republican Party here, is they keep holding these moronic conventions and losing all the data and Republican voters and trying to nominate basically the worst general election candidate they can find. The more editorializing I can do here, the better. But how does this translate in I guess in the last election in Georgia? Did you see a translation to an event or a switch, a change in general election outcomes?
Well, we don't really know yet.
So you haven't had any data of the general election for Georgia. This is based on their
No. I'm just talking about the Georgia primary election from last week.
Okay.
So there was that push towards mail-in ballots and the in-person. I mean, it's kind of the polling that we did in the Republican circles. It's kind of what you would expect. Like I said, older voters were more likely to say that they were going to vote by mail, and younger and especially male voters were saying, no, I'm still going to show up on election day.
So this is a trend we'll keep an eye on.
Exactly.
What about going to school?
So this has been fun. We at WPA ran a series of models back in April. So how we do models is we do a large scale kind of survey. So we survey tens of thousands of people nationwide, ask them a very short series of questions and collect the observations, which then we match back to hundreds of data points that we have, like that scary big data term. That's kind of what we use. And then for these, we also use data on a county level of where COVID was striking. So data from Johns Hopkins specifically. So, and then our data scientists went through and found the patterns of who on an individual level is more likely to behave a certain way. So for this, what we're looking at here, who is more likely to send their kids back to school immediately upon being able to. And what we can see here is that Virginia is more ready to send their kids back to school than some of their neighbors. 25% of Virginians want to send their kids back to school immediately. The difference is in West Virginia, 51% were ready to send their kids back to school right away.
That's pretty funny. That's an interesting perspective. Like why? But we'll figure that out later. So well, Virginia,
not as hard hit.
Right.
Not as hard hit as Virginia and some of these other states.
And they're more socially distant. Are we finding that more in rural areas?
We are. I mean, I think we saw that even with some of the protests to reopen the state. They were coming from a lot of the more rural areas.
Okay, so is this an overperformance when you look at the statewide to rural desires to get their kids because they're more socially distant anyway?
I think so. I think there's a lot of, kind of ideological opinions that go back there too. And again, if
Okay.
they're not as hard hit, there's not, you can see it on the right with the weight category. New York
Right.
kind of stands out as one of the states where more people are going to wait to send their kids back to school. They were particularly hard hit. And they're just going to kind of hold off and make sure that everything is safe.
It's interesting. It's interesting how the split there goes. If you just follow New York and Virginia, 25-23, 31-23, and then 8. There's just a big drop off there. It's a change in dynamics there. It's just,
we also have a segment of people who are never going to send their kids back to school, which I don't fully,
really.
They're going to have to be very much more confident in how schools are going to kind of clean and keep their kids safe. But we'll see if that's it is truly a forever kind of never sending my kids back to school.
It's a very interesting look, because it doesn't take much to throw some elections based on that. Look at the DeSantis race in Florida and how school choice impacted that one there.
Yeah.
Let's do consumers. Consumers are stabilizing.
Yeah, they are, thankfully. So this data is from Morning Consult. It's consumer confidence numbers. So anything over 100 is good, below 100 is a little bit more pessimistic. These numbers come out on the 1st of the month. So you can really see, so January is January 1st data. So January, February, March, Virginia, Maryland, and Delaware, the whole region is fairly optimistic about the way the economy is for them personally and more generally. And then we see the sharp decline in April and May. But the data that came out on June 1st is stable and actually even a little bit of an uptick.
Yeah.
Which is positive. And it corresponds with what we saw with the unemployment numbers that everyone was pleasantly surprised by, that unemployment didn't go that much higher when that data came out in June. So we'll see if this is.
What's one of the more interesting things, if you juxtapose this with the Northam and Hogan numbers, Virginians are more confident about the economy, and the consumers are. But Hogan still way outperforms Ralph Northam despite of that. So it is, a personality thing there, isn't it?
It's personality, or it could be other issues. I mean,
still though, I mean, like if your economy's better, and that guy's 15 points ahead of you in the polls in his home state, and they're down. It's just observing Maryland, Virginia numbers here, and just trying to draw some parallel. Of course, there may not be any, so let's just keep moving it along then.
All right.
Let's travel. The travel numbers were very interesting for me.
Yeah. So these are the same models that we're talking about for school. It's the same kind of methodology. So this one is who is going to be looking to travel and specifically stay at a hotel soon within a pandemic, after the pandemic's over, or versus those who are going to wait. So do want to stress, like, this is the stay in a hotel kind of method. I know anecdotally, I'm from New York. There are more people that are willing to kind of travel to other families' houses, but not necessarily stay in a hotel. So this is kind of I'm staying somewhere that is not necessarily as controlled as I know it will be. And 29% of Virginians want to travel soon. They're going to stay at a hotel soon after the pandemic's over, which is similar to a lot of these other southern states. It's actually higher than in South Carolina or in Florida.
Yeah, that was interesting how Virginians really want to get away. They feel like in the same way if you look at that in the school, I mean, I think when the governor came out and said, we're shut down to June 10th, everyone's like, June 10th, that's 3 months, but if you look at New Yorkers, they're not going anywhere.
No. And same thing in New Jersey. They know that they're kind of hunkered down for a while. And again, I think that says a lot to do with.
They were impacted heavily though.
Yeah. So.
But look at West Virginia, 6%, same as New York. That's so interesting.
And that also might be an economic issue. So there's a lot of different things that come into play here. But the way that we kind of talk to clients and potential clients about how to use like this data specifically, if you're a hotel and you're trying to market to people, the soon group, whoever falls into this is the people that you're going to want to send your promotions to, like, hey, my hotel is awesome, don't you want to get away? Like that's who you can kind of target of like, they're going to be traveling again, kind of like normal fairly soon. This weight segment you need to really stress what you're doing to keep people safe, how you're cleaning your rooms. You know, I saw some hotels are keeping like rooms clean and then unoccupied for 48 hours to kind of just let things settle. So for this wait group, that's who the hotel should be talking to about all of the measures that they're putting into place. Whereas the soon, or those are the people that you can start sending immediate promotions to. And again, because these are models, we can do that on an individual.
And you do this for private clients too. I mean, you're there is not just political folks. You do this for a lot of corporate clients. Okay, great. Well, Amanda Iovino, thank you for joining us here, Virginia Free TV. Whoop, whoop. You know, putting the YouTube channel here. We're trying to tack into the wind that's blowing this on the Zoom and doing some more virtual stuff. Give me 3 quick takeaways, and then we'll have the one question we had at the beginning.
So I think takeaway on the COVID, people want to return to normal. I think people are looking to get back to their daily lives fairly quickly, but they're not going to be kind of too rash about it. So when it comes to voting specifically on COVID, I think that we're going to have higher participation than ever if some of these mail-in ballots, these reforms kind of take place through November. I know a lot of states push them for their primaries, but if this happens again for November, we're going to be looking at record turnout again. And then on the political side of things, I think you really want to look at, you know, just to be timely, the Black Lives Matter movement. I think we saw a spike in support for it, but that spike, like we talked about earlier, is going to be more long lasting than a lot of the other spikes that we see, because the momentum had been there for the movement over the last couple of years. Right.
Okay. To that end, is there an opportunity? I'm going to try to meld that question that came from one of our participants. Is there an opportunity for Republicans to go after African American voters where they have not been that successful, to tack into the Black Lives Matter and say, yeah, let's do this, but you know, how well have you been served by the current, you know, incumbent, and look at his record on the crime bill and all those other statements that, frankly, Kamala Harris made punching bag out of back last summer.
Yeah, I think, you know, we talked about Larry Hogan before. I think he is a model for how Republicans can start making outreach into that community. Continue and increase the level of outreach that we can talk to that community. We have to. I think it's long-term better for the party and for the country if we continue to make that outreach. But I would really look at kind of what Hogan was doing. And as we talked about before, it's first going there and having those conversations, and then following through on those conversations after they're done. I think that's a big first step for us.
Okay, well, the Republicans have their work cut out for them, as they usually do. They try to make it as difficult as possible for them. Virginia Free remains steadfastly, staunchly, proudly nonpartisan and independent in the realm of politics. And that's one of the great blessings in life, is not to be able to. We can point fingers at both sides. God knows they both need it. But Amanda, I really appreciate you joining us today, and I hope you'll come back on and update us on more polling and more modeling as it goes throughout the summer. It's going to be an exciting year in 2020, but we're going into a gubernatorial cycle here in Virginia, and I know that's going to be of interest to a lot of folks as well. So we'll hopefully have you back on here in a regular, maybe have you on a regular basis here once we find the right time to fit into the schedule, because we're all working out of our homes. So it's exciting. So we'll get this cut and clipped over to YouTube, and we'll push it out from there. But thanks for joining us, Amanda Iovino with WPA Intel. Thank you.